Hello everyone, this is Dave. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. Today we'll be talking about predictions for space stocks in 2025. Before we dive into that though, I do just need to thank a couple new channel members. We have Ian Fletcher, Nick Humphreys, Tom Butters. I'm not sure if I thanked Craig S. already, so if not, I'll do so again. Thank you guys so much for joining the channel members and supporting what I do here. It is very much appreciated. If you are new here and you do find this video interesting, I hope by the end of the video you will consider hitting that subscribe button down below, as it is incredibly helpful to continue the growth of the channel. And if you're not new here, well, your comments and likes and shares always help out so much as well. So thank you for that, as well as just continuing to view. As always, very much appreciated. I can't believe 2024 is already pretty much done. It's been a crazy year, and 2025 is starting to look like it could be even crazier for space stocks and the space industry. On to my predictions for 2025. Talking a little bit about Rocket Lab specifically now, we'll start off with some predictions for them. In terms of Neutron, I'm thinking right now that it does actually manage to launch in 2024, but it's probably prudent to expect some kind of a delay, so I'm thinking maybe a few months. Right now, they're saying they'll launch in June. Maybe they end up launching in October or something like that, which, rocket programs notorious for delays. If they launch in October, I think that's pretty fine, and depending on how the launch goes, I'll be pretty happy with that, as long as it doesn't just blow up on the pad or something. In terms of that launch outcome, I think I trust in Rocket Lab's team, their experience and abilities. I think Neutron makes it to orbit on the first attempt. Perhaps coming in back re-entering, it suffers some kind of an anomaly. I don't think it'll do a re-entry burn, but maybe during that landing burn, they'll have some issues there, not something they've really ever done before. And we have, an explosion or a hard landing into the ocean, or an issue with re-entry, as opposed to that nice, soft kind of hover landing over the ocean where they want to basically practice as if they were landing on a barge. So that's my guess for Neutron's first launch. Let me know what you think. Always interested to hear. When this does happen, I predict, Dave will cry tears of happiness. But yeah, you can believe that I feel incredibly invested in this launch, and it is the biggest single factor playing on Rocket Lab's stock price this year. If we don't see a successful launch this year, that means bad things for the stock price. If we do see a successful launch, it could be good. So we'll have to see around that. The hype, if we do continue to get red hot overall markets, plus a massive hype around Neutron's launch, maybe we see some kind of a short-term bump there, followed by a drop potentially as we get back to business as usual. Let me know, maybe depending on where the stock is this year, going into a launch, I'll play some kind of a small short-term gamble on that in the stock price. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that's going. I also do think, with Neutron progressing well, that Rocket Lab will be onboarded to the NSSL launch program this year, and that they definitely should be. So that will unlock a lot of potential new payloads for them to be launching. Probably won't launch any of those this year, maybe not next year even, but maybe the year after that they'll be able to actually launch some of these national security payloads that pay so very well. And this is one of the big cornerstones of Neutron's potential customer base. In terms of Electron, I think Rocket Lab probably guides for something like 22 to 25 or maybe 26 launches for 2025, and as we've seen over the past several years, they probably don't end up actually doing what they guided, because customers always have issues with readiness. But maybe they do launch 21 times. That's not unreasonable, and once you get to that point, we start to have quite good gross margins and positive, delivering net income to the bottom line from Electron. So you love to see it. Hopefully we get to that 21, 22 mark. I really hope so. I do think, though, that reuse for Electron will continue to be on the back burner. There's even a chance they just cancel it because they decide it's not really worth it. Apparently it will only deliver something like an additional 5% gross margin, so not a ton of revenue, and they've taken a lot of those learnings from re-entering electrons and all that stuff and into their Neutron reuse program, so not a complete waste. But yeah, maybe I'd say there's a 50-50 chance they just cancel Electron reuse completely Space systems now, I do think that Rocket Lab will land a contract for another batch of SDA satellites for Tranche 3, which is expected to be awarded early 2025. As many of you will know, they were awarded 18 satellites in the transport layer for Tranche 2, and these are quite valuable satellites, a massive contract for Rocket Lab. I would expect maybe the same or even bigger for Tranche 3, which will be bigger as well, probably transport layer as well, because that is what they have the most experience in. The company will achieve new records for space systems revenue, driven by the current Tranche 2 constellation build out, as well as that Global Star constellation, delivering those to the customer and capitalizing on the majority of the revenue for that contract. I don't think we hear any firm details in 2025 on what Rocket Lab's own constellation will be. I think they're going to want to wait until Neutron gets a decent launch cadence going, and they can launch basically whatever they want before they really let that cat out of the bag. They'll be working on it in the background though, and really Neutron is the big holdup on that front. In terms of revenue growth, we just had a massive revenue growth for 2024. Maybe that slows down just a tad in 2025. I still think we'll grow year over year, quite a decent rate, but I don't know. I'll have to dive back. I'm planning to go back into my spreadsheets and predictions to take a look at what I think they'll make in 2025 and beyond. So keep a lookout for that video shortly. Next up, Mars sample return. I do think that Bill Nelson does end up awarding this in January or February, like he said, right before the new administration comes into power. He probably breaks up the contract among several different bidders, so I don't think Rocket Lab takes home the whole thing. Maybe they do get awarded some portion of it, like the Ascent vehicle, taking those samples back into Martian orbit or something like that. But ultimately, when the new administration comes in, there's probably a decent chance this whole thing gets canceled anyway, so it'll be a moot point. Maybe Elon will convince Jared that they're going there anyway with Starship, so why don't you let us go and get it? Or, something else happens that, So I don't think necessarily that the announcement we get very soon will stand, unfortunately, for NASA, but remains to be seen. On to Intuitive Machines. I think 2025 will be a very exciting year for our favorite lunar space company. IM2 is coming very shortly, should be in January. It will build on the success of IM1 and a lot of the learnings. They did have troubleshooting on the fly. So many issues with that one in terms of, not being able to calculate the correct distance to the moon. So to be as successful as they were in that first attempt was quite impressive. And I think they'll have a complete success in 2025 with their lunar lander, which could be very good for the stock as well. And I just think the team has learned a lot and has shown a certain level of ability from that first attempt, so I feel more comfortable with the team going forward. I think the stock could run up and perhaps crash after the landing, because that's what we saw with the first lunar lander attempt, a massive run up in the stock. We don't know for sure what will happen, obviously, but there is that potential if they get a lot of publicity and people talking about them. They have the successful landing, the NASA administrator going and talking about how great everything is, working with them, and blah, blah, blah. And then maybe a crash after as things come back down from space. But there is perhaps a potential to play a short-term move around that as well if you want to be risky. I do hold some shares for the long. So definitely going to be an interesting year for Intuitive Machines as well, not to mention the NSN. They just got an award for that announced, and a lot of projects on the go for Intuitive Machines as well. Not to mention Viper. They might get that rover and have another payload to deliver to the moon. Can't wait to see what happens there. In terms of Redwire, another interesting company, I do think they might potentially achieve a positive net income quarter, maybe towards the end of the year, Q4. They've been adjusted EBITDA positive, but never net income positive. So if they do achieve that milestone, it'll be very exciting. They did have an acquisition recently, which has kind of weighed on the most recent quarters. But they don't have a ton of cash in the bank, so it makes me feel a little uneasy when they're not yet net income positive. And I really look forward to that, because It'll be a new era in space once a bunch of these new space companies are actually positive as opposed to cash burners all the time, as they have been for the past several years since going public. Planet Labs, another interesting one. They've had probably the worst year out of this bunch in terms of stock returns. I think they will achieve positive adjusted EBITDA within the next few quarters, which will be exciting, but we have to be patient with the revenue growth. I'm not expecting them to jump back up 50% revenue year over year or anything like that. Probably a more modest 20%, as that commercial side of things really doesn't grow as well as we expected. But the government customers remain relatively strong, and they can at least, right the ship and potentially position themselves for further growth in the years ahead. In terms of the big picture with the space industry and NASA, I think we are going to see a ton of massive changes from this new administration being headed up by Jared Isaacman. I think at first he's going to at least make an effort to distance himself in appearance from SpaceX and Elon Musk, perhaps award some kind of high-profile contract to someone not SpaceX, at least just to say, hey, look, see, I'm not just Elon Musk's, whipping boy or whatever. I am my own guy, and I have my own thoughts. SpaceX still will, of course, do very well, but maybe he wants to get at least one big announcement to someone else just to, prove his separation from them. I think NASA's massively expensive SLS rocket will finally get canceled. At least that's what the rumblings we're hearing. And thank God, because it is costing NASA so much money, taking so long to build, will finally get canceled, and they'll rely on other rockets going forward. The space station, I don't think it gets any more life extensions under Isaacman. I think they want to move on, focus on the moon, Mars, and beyond, and leave low Earth orbit to commercial space stations. So that one will eventually get destroyed. And in general, there will be a lot more cost-cutting measures at NASA and trying to get spending under control and focus more on those commercial partnerships and cost efficiency that way. Talking about the overall stock markets and what we think might happen there. And I don't think I've ever gone into a year feeling so conflicted as I do for 2025. So this one I'm really struggling with, I have to admit, right off the bat. As we look at the setup going into 2025, obviously 2024 has been absolutely amazing for most of us, if you're invested in space stocks especially, but the overall market as well have performed outstanding. And I have to say, after the run we've had over the past couple years, it does in some ways start to feel a bit like late 2021 and 2022 when we went into that massive crash. So does have me feeling a little bit uneasy after this massive run-up. However, there are some differences, right? So back then, we had inflation starting to get out of control. Now we have inflation coming under control. Interest rates are being cut, so we won't have that, weighing down the markets. Although, yes, the rate cuts will be slower than some hope for. Additionally, we will have Donald Trump heading into the White House, and he may very well basically just pour gasoline all over the stock markets and try to drive growth as fast as possible. So, he may have impacts there that we may not even be able to think about right now. In terms of some of the analysts out there, well, Dan Ives is a guy I've listened to several times. He follows a lot of tech stocks, and he thinks that tech will still be in a bull market for the next 2 to 3 years at this point, even after the amazing run tech has had. Similarly, we do have Tom Lee, another famous bull, saying that any market dips right now are a buying opportunity, and he expects things to go higher over the next couple of years. So there are people out there who do expect things to go higher, and I can understand the sentiment, but I think it has to be driven by earnings growth, not multiple expansion at this point. So really, I think for 2025, we have to see these companies deliver growth, deliver EPS numbers and revenue numbers, beating estimates, and the AI story has to start actually playing out. So all this is to say, I guess, I'm a little unsure at this point, more than ever before, where the markets go. If I have to guess, I think I lean that there is no crash coming, and we do go higher on the back of, great earnings growth. At least that's my hope. And I think bringing it back to our favorite space stocks and the amazing run they've had, I don't think it's fair to expect anything like what we've seen this year, next year. Pulling up a chart here of some of our favorite space stocks, of course, Rocket Lab, as well as Redwire, Planet Labs, Intuitive Machines, and some others, MDA as well, on a 1-year basis. We're looking at like multiple 100% returns for many of them, right? So 373% here, as well as 360, 158, and 77 for Planet Labs, bringing up the rear. Still actually not a bad year for Planet Labs, really, when you think about it. If the markets go up, they can still perhaps perform okay, but I really think they do need to digest some of these massive gains they've had, and we'll have to look for value and be quite selective as opposed to just buying the whole basket at the levels they're at right now. So yeah, looking for earnings growth from these companies in the coming year and having them, digest some of these massive stock gains, grow into these valuations that they've now received. And I do think they're capable of that, but we have to be patient with some of them because they are still very new companies, at least to the public markets. So what do you guys think is going to happen in the space industry and with our favorite space stocks in 2025? Love to hear your thoughts on Rocket Lab's position going into the year, as well as Intuitive Machines, Redwire, Planet Labs, MDA, or anyone else, and the big picture with the overall stock market and NASA, of course, as well. It's going to be an extremely interesting year. So many unknowns. I really can't wait to see what happens. It should be fun, and I hope you'll stick around with me for that. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and happy holiday season to all of you. I will see you soon for my next video. Bye for now.